Welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got Dave Relf from Aruma on the line with me. Now, Dave is the Quality Safeguarding and Practice Manager from Aruma, and so his part of the business is involved in seeking excellence, right, in all these types of areas. So what I'm going to do today is ask Dave a bunch of questions to really understand what these, should we say, types of departments do, and what's the philosophy behind it, why do we need them, and what can providers of all shapes and sizes do to implement these types of things in their individual businesses. So Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
So all right, let's talk about you. So Aruma's got a newly developed quality safeguarding and practice team. What were the drivers? Why did this team come into existence?
Yeah, sure. So I joined Aruma 2020, right in the middle of COVID restrictions, actually, and was brought on to support with the development of a national quality safeguarding and practice team. So it's been around for about 4 years or so now. Aruma is a very large organisation, as you'd know, and we're the amalgamation of a number of different organisations. So EW Tipping merged with House with No Steps, merged with ex-government services in Victoria and New South Wales. We took on some Salvation Army services in Queensland. So we've really become this conglomerate and have become known as Aruma. And with that amalgamation came a number of different roles, whether they were practice advisors or practice leaders in the different organisations that came together. And my role was to think about, well, how do we pull those roles together and develop a nationally consistent quality safeguarding and practice team who can support our operational managers and teams to achieve great outcomes for the people we support. So in terms of rationale, it's kind of twofold. The quality safeguarding and practice partners, of which there's 11, who report to me, they partner with the regional managers across the organisation. So they generally partner with 2 regional managers each and their respective teams. And that's to support with all sorts of what we call referrals, although we don't wait for people to come to us. That's one avenue that people can request support from the quality safeguarding and practice team. But it's also that we utilise data such as incidents and complaints data to proactively engage with managers, consider any patterns, trends, risks or anomalies, and think about where there might be opportunities for improvement or an action for the manager, or where there might be some support required by a member of the quality safeguarding and practice team. So very much working in partnership with our operational colleagues to achieve great support and to, I guess, translate procedure and policy into practice. But in addition to that, the quality safeguarding and practice team also oversees a number of practice uplift initiatives. So in addition to that localised support, we also take a national view, and Aruma operates across 4 states, Queensland, New South Wales, ACT and Victoria, to really think about, well, how are we going around things such as mealtime management or person-centred active support or positive behaviour support, practice leadership, health and wellbeing. We've got 11 practice uplift initiatives that we've got on the go, and the members of the quality safeguarding and practice team really work to deliverables under each of those different practice uplift initiatives. We're governed by a practice uplift steering committee, and we work in partnership with operations to consider the capability of the organisation with respect to individual areas of practice, think about opportunities for improvement and make recommendations, and then work with our colleagues across the organisation to implement those opportunities for improvement over time. So really a twofold role of the quality safeguarding and practice team, that localised support and that national oversight.
Exactly. And I suppose if I was to paraphrase some of that, it's say you can't assume that everyone's on the same page, right? You can't assume that every single manager or support worker is homogenous. We're not. And what that means is that you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And that could come from so many inputs, couldn't it? It could be from, there's every single one of them is valid. You could have a grassroots support worker observation on the way that we're, putting an observation on the management of administering medication, for example. Like you got to take that feedback on board and go, oh, it's really painful. I don't like the way the app's working, or that's valid. You could have other experience at the mid-level where people bring in something they've done maybe at another provider, and people go, oh, wow, never thought about it that way. Let's go ahead and do that. You've got best practice from a senior point of view. You've got best practice from the NDIS practice standards and all the quality stuff there. So you got to really, I would imagine your role is kind of you're like an orb of 360 degrees of being willing to absorb all of this and then digest it and go, well, this is what we're actually going to do now.
Absolutely. Aruma supports approximately 5,500 people with disability. We've got about the same number of staff members supporting those people. And to achieve that consistency of practice across all of the work we do, which spans across home and living services, community services, children's services, supported employment, it's a real challenge to get that consistency of practice, where the rubber meets the road, where people are delivering quality supports to the people who use our services. So we take on all feedback from across the organisation, and one of the biggest challenges has been to bring it all together because, again, that amalgamation of services, people were used to doing things in different ways. And so to bring all of that under the one umbrella, under the one approach, it's one thing to write a procedure, it's another thing to implement that procedure into practice. And I've found that communication is critical to that. So finding really good mechanisms to communicate in a consistent way to all of our managers, so that all of our managers are communicating in a consistent way to all of their support teams. That's critical. Because so much changes in this complex sector and the complex work that we do, that we need to keep people on top of changes in the sector, changes in legislation, changes in practice standards, changes in procedure. But also we know that our operational colleagues are overwhelmed. Like, this is a busy gig and people are struggling to keep up with the workload and everything that's asked of them in this climate. So it's finding ways to really pace the requests that we're making and the updates that we're making along a journey, and just moving like a steady train and taking our time to kind of bring everyone onto the same page. But the final piece in that puzzle is governance, and ensuring that we've got good data to actually demonstrate that people are implementing things in the way that we need to. That's been one of the big challenges as well, is to get that those systems set up so that we have those good governance systems, but then also getting the data being input into those systems being of a reasonable level of accuracy to ensure we've got confidence that those policies and procedures are transferring into consistent practice.
Correct. It requires 100% holistic thinking. So my business coach and IT background kind of immediately goes also to technology. So like I personally have a philosophy in my own business of we don't do pieces of paper, right? A lot of people are used to that. But say, for example, the medication, I call it a medication management checklist. And that is inside of the rostering systems app, and you go, Webster Park, morning, meds, accepted medication, perform 7 rights, submit. And that's an example of get rid of the paper, be able to report on every single line item that exists, a successful medication administration, and all of that. Those are great ways. It's all about data in a way, especially for the people that have got the right, maybe IT mindset, but also, as you say, at Aruma's level, when you're going into the governance arena, you need to be able to do business intelligence, people call it BI, on all of those points, right? Because then, as you're saying, you can say, I'm going to pick out those 5,000 line items and show you that what we just said is the way to do it. We've actually done it now.
Yes, absolutely. And we need to demonstrate that the practice uplift initiatives that we're implementing are having an effect and an impact on the people that we support, and a positive one.
Yes.
So yeah, it is a tricky balance to strike. But yeah, we've had some great outcomes over the last 4 years, and I feel like we're really starting to make some traction. A lot of the early years that I was in the role was spent developing those foundational systems, getting a quality safeguarding framework in place, thinking about how we're, pulling the data from our incident management system and using tools like Power BI and various things to be able to identify the patterns and trends in the data that we do have access to. And that all takes time to get to a point where you can actually reliably look at that data and think about what it means and what it means for the next steps and what it means for demonstrating efficacy of practice uplift.
It does. And it's also important, I'm sure you guys like this as well, like management can't equally sit in its ivory tower and go, oh, do this and do that and just like leave it. We also need to we need to have that grassroots perspective to go, like, the way that we build, say, that med chart, whatever, in the system, the user, this is where I go IT, like the user experience at the support worker level, in a way, should be so simple that the way that you interact with the system, what it does is it's kind of translating what's written down in your procedures. So the support worker doesn't have to think about that. It will go, can't do, or yeah, do this now. Like, it should kind of respond so that it technologically, it brings the procedure to life. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Philosophically?
Oh, absolutely. And an example of that, we've just recently implemented into our incident management system an approach to root cause analysis after medication errors occur. And so we've had for a long time in our procedures that we're asking our managers who are reviewing incidents to complete a root cause analysis, understand the contributing factors, really get to the root cause of what caused that medication error and address that root cause through appropriate actions. And that's been in our training, it's been in our procedures for upwards of 4 years. But recently we've made the change where we've actually built that simple line of questioning into our incident review process. So when completing that incident review, managers are essentially asked to respond to those contributing factors and to really work through a root cause analysis tool in the system. So on the one hand, it's getting better outcomes for us at a service and a customer level, and we're ensuring that root cause analysis is completing. On the other hand, we can actually see what actions and themes are coming out of our medication errors, what contributing factors are sitting behind them, what actions are managers taking to address them, and then areas that the quality safeguarding and practice team can potentially address where we're seeing themes coming out of medication errors and what we might need to target from an education perspective. So it's things like that that we're always thinking about building into the way that we work, so that it doesn't become an additional arduous task, but rather we're building that procedure into the way we do things.
Correct. It's like in most industries now, data, or data, potato. All of this becomes so crucial. Like I think most industries, it's not just software or corporate this, corporate that. Like the more sophisticated you become, you have to do the things we're talking about in terms of extraction because you're at scale, you're on mass, right? So it has to be simple, but it has to be sophisticated in the way you implement it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
I love this stuff. I'm such a geek. I say it all the time. Okay, so like you're a very fascinating man with your experience, right? So you're doing this with Aruma now, but your background does span both URALA, but also the National Disability Services, the NDIS. I can see that at URALA you were a positive behaviour support practitioner. So how do you think that behaviour support practitioner background influences the work that you're doing now?
It stems from a passion, and that I'd say that passion started from when I started in the sector upwards of 20 years ago as a support worker, and then moved into the positive behaviour support space and operational management space. But really about putting the person and the people that we support at the centre of everything we do, taking a human rights-based approach to everything that we do, thinking about how we involve people in as much as we do as possible. Positive behaviour support for me, I really enjoyed because one, there was a level of creativity to it, which I really enjoyed. Two, there was a science to it, whereby we could, hypothesize what a function of a behavior might be based on data. And being able to actually get to that root cause of why someone might be behaving in a certain way to express their needs or to communicate, I found it really intriguing that if we could actually address that root cause, that function of the behaviour, and consider what strategies we could teach the person to build on, that we could then see reductions in behaviours of concern, improvements in quality of life, reductions in restrictive practices, but then that flow-on effect of teams starting to work together and working with a consistent and collaborative culture to support that person. It's those outcomes that really drive me and drive my passion. So when I'm working with teams and talking to support workers and managers, and whenever I attend a team meeting, one of the first things I ask is, what do you enjoy about your role? And we go around the room, and it's a great way to get everyone in the meeting engaged and speaking about what it is that they enjoy. But everyone's here for the same reason, Chris. We're all here to support people to have great quality outcomes in their life and for their quality of life to be as good as it can possibly be with the support that we're providing. And the sentiment of everyone in the sector, I think, when you ask that question, no matter what role we're in, is around that exact that exact approach. So positive behaviour support for me, it really led me to have a fascination in the way in which positive behaviour support interacts with practice leadership, the manager of the service, and that critical role. Obviously, the interaction with person-centred active support and positive behaviour support fascinated me, and where we're seeing good person-centred active support implemented, we're seeing that reduction in behaviours of concern. I guess what I'm saying is I'm very passionate about all things practice, and people often ask me, well, what is practice? And the answer is everything. Everything that we're doing is practice when we're supporting people with disabilities. So to be in a role where I can draw on that experience and those skills and that passion to lead a team, to inspire that passion across all of our operational teams and all of our organisation, that's what I guess drives me and gets me out of bed each morning. And that's really stemmed from those earlier roles in both support work, operational management, and positive behaviour support.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's interesting because like with the opening question, with everything you just said then, it kind of just really frames everything you said initially. Like it's coming from the right values, the right ethics, the right philosophy, which, you know, it speaks to me a lot. Yeah, because I mean, as many practitioners will say, you know, every behavior is a communication, right? So, you know, the people with the wrong mindset, you know, in the industry will go, oh, they're being difficult, oh, they're being rude, all that kind of stuff. When a proper practitioner will go, no, they're communicating a frustration, or there's a root cause as to why this meltdown happened, or whatever it is, right? So I love that. I think that background really feeds through, because that's outcomes for everyone, right? Like one of the previous podcast episodes was talking about safety, and the lady that was on had a mining background, and it was interesting because it's like, how do you bring the mining industry's approach to safety to disability? And her point of view, which is lovely, which is basically like, we should be taking the attitude that we don't just accept that support workers are going to get the bite on the arm or get hit in the face or whatever these things, because that unfortunately is that's the dark, cynical world where we go, oh God, it's part of the job, worker comp claim. Whereas if you take the more enlightened view, like you just did there, you're reducing the chances of it erupting to that point. So I'd imagine that it feeds through actually in terms of worker safety as well.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And
this podcast is brought to you in proud partnership between Peak Provider and Isango Care Partners. Isango is a system that I have used personally in my own business on the Central Coast, and do so today. It blows my mind in terms of what it can do in terms of the simplicity of the rostering process, both as an administrator in the back end at the management level, but also from a support worker point of view. I'm a believer that you should not have any pieces of paper as an NDIS provider, and that even your observational charts should be inside of a system such as Isango. And I'm happy to say it can do all of that and more. So if you're looking for something that allows you to do billing once a week at the click of a single button, or indeed export to Xero for payroll, it does all of that. But it goes even beyond that, and it starts to exceed many of the systems out there, because it gives the ability to manage concepts such as SIL houses, so property number 1, 2, and 3, and which participants are in that property and what staff belong to it, etc. You can match the skills and particular support worker preferences from one participant to a team of support workers, and you can even stop people from being rostered on from a compliance point of view if they've not uploaded their recent CPR certificate, etc. So all of that is just incredibly polished and works really well, and I can testify to that from a personal experience. But what it does is it does way more than that from a customization point of view. I've never met a IT provider that is not only willing to do customizations, but able to turn them around in a timely manner according to your very specific requirements. So if you're interested in signing up to Isango, check it out via Peak Provider. It can do everything from capturing data to tracking leads to creating participants based on all of that initial data, and ongoing administration. So don't have all these data points in various places that are disorganized. Have them in a central system such as Isango, and you will find that your administrational time gets cut in half. So inquire now via the link in the show notes below. This is something that Peak Provider highly recommends, and I hope that it does well for your business.
And what's really powerful with that is regularly engaging in reflective practice. And it's been one of the things I've really tried to promote across Aruma since I've been here, is empowering and encouraging the managers of our services and our staff to regularly reflect on their own practice, but to support their teams and their individual staff members to reflect on their practice. And it doesn't just have to be after a critical incident's occurred. You know, reflecting on practice is something that we're trying to embed in everything that we do. Reflecting on things before they're about to happen, before someone moves to another service or starts, you know, at a new job. You know, let's reflect on how we can make that experience them as great as possible. Reflecting on actions. So as we're moving through our day-to-day tasks, actually taking time throughout our days to reflect on the way in which we're working. But certainly taking that time after things do happen and thinking about, well, if that was to happen again, how might we operate differently and what might we do to get a different outcome? Normalizing that approach to reflective practice, I think, has come from my background in positive behaviour support as well, and certainly something we're trying to embed here.
I'm going to do a parallel to recruitment and shift notes here for a second. Think about things like ChatGPT and large language models and AI and all that stuff, and think about recruitment and also shift notes. I had one experience where we had a 10-year-old child that we were, you know, doing supports for. He was autistic, and he would abscond, and he would do what he's going to do, right? And I noticed in the shift notes with the support worker that she was using language such as, oh, he was a naughty boy. He did, quote, bad behavior. And for me, because I've got the right experience, I was like, red flag, you are the wrong support worker to be working with that person, because that's how you see that, that, and it just goes to show that you got the wrong values. Maybe you're in the wrong industry, like whatever, the red flag. But, at a minimum, you need some bloody training. You probably shouldn't be working with children with autism, for example, if that's the case. So I'm going to throw a random idea out there, and providers, take it if you will. Maybe this is something Aruma might consider. Like, I think that with the right privacy constraints, I think there's an opportunity for AI to review all shift notes en masse and look for red flag language, so that we can say red alert, wrong support workers, training either required or shift to something else. What do you think of that random idea?
I think it's an excellent suggestion, because it is a very manual process to review progress notes, and there's no real easy way, or historically there hasn't been a really easy way to do that, other than to specifically look at the progress notes for one individual and really drill down. It's a real manual process to do that. So absolutely, there's going to be ways that AI can really support us to have a better understanding and assess those themes that are coming through. And it's an untapped resource, one that we need to be a little bit careful of course. I am conscious that AI is the buzzword at the moment, and the opportunities are exciting. But I also think we need to be cautious as we move into a new way of doing things, and just be, again, reflecting on what that means as we move through that change.
Correct, 100%. And hence the caveat with the right privacy constraints and all of that, right? So in terms of Aruma, I know that you are in the process of implementing a new quality framework. We've got a background to why the team exists, so to speak, but can you tell us what that framework and initiative is about? What's it what's it involving?
Yeah, so we realized a little while ago that with all of the good things that we were doing and all the practice uplift and all the support for operational managers and teams, we were still not confident to be able to say that consistent high quality support was being provided to every single Aruma participant across the whole organization all the time. And that's concerning. We've got practice standards that we all, hope to not only, adhere to, but exceed. We've got mechanisms in place to really work towards better practice, but that assurance that things are happening consistently all the time for the people we support, we weren't having confidence on that. So we had a session with a lady named Kathy Balding and her associates, and it was around the strategic quality system model, which Kathy developed quite some years ago, but it was also the basis for the Victorian Community Services Framework that was developed in 2018. And the premise is reasonably simple. It's that organisations often have all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. We've got the training in place, and we've got the quality safeguarding and practice team. We've got all of our procedures. We've got everything that we need. And that's why organisations do so well at, certification audits, because it's a process of demonstrating that, yes, we've got all these pieces of the puzzle, and we can show you all of these pieces of the puzzle. What we realised through our work with Kathy Balding, and subsequently with Ignis Consulting, who we've been working on to really think about how Aruma can work towards having a better strategic quality framework in place, is that it's one thing to have all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzles. It's another thing to actually know what those jigsaw pieces look like when it's all one picture. And what we were finding was a lot of the people who work at Aruma and the people we support and their families, people had that assurance that we had things in place, but everything needed to come together so that it made sense. We needed to understand what we're actually all working towards. So the premise is to essentially put a flag on the hill and work with all of our senior managers, work with our board, work with the people we support and their families, their support teams, the managers who manage those support teams, all of our shared services or corporate services across the organisation. And we've really been working on facilitating a number of workshops across the whole organisation to really get everyone on the same page with thinking about, well, what is it that we are working towards? And essentially those 4 goals are to provide person-centred, safe, effective and connected services. And we do this exercise where we get everyone to think about, if you had a loved one who was receiving disability support services, who moved overseas to study at a university, but they required support from a disability service provider whilst they were overseas, what support is it that you would like that service provider to be providing? What do you want that to look like? And we get everyone to really unpack all of the, the things that we really want for our loved one when they're overseas from a disability service provider, but also all the things that we do not want for them. And that exercise is really telling, because what it demonstrates is that everything that we do as disability service providers, but also in aged care or healthcare or any human services, really does come back to those same 4 goals. We want to be person-centered or individualized. We want to provide safe services. We want to all be working on the same page with the person and their support networks. And we want to make sure we're doing things right, doing things effectively. So with that said, we're now Arumifying that language, because those 4 goals have come from the strategic quality framework, and thinking about, well, what are those goals for Aruma? The premise will be the same, but the language will differ. We're putting that flag on the hill. We're then getting all of our support teams and managers and the people we support and all shared services to think about, what is your role in achieving those 4 quality goals? Nice. And that's a process of, 1, engaging everyone across the organisation and really thinking about, well, what is my role in this? But 2, in engaging everyone so that we're all on the same page that these are our goals. Those goals will sit in the centre of a framework, which will have a number of domains around it, which will essentially be our filing system, and our quality safeguarding framework that we've got in place now will fit in behind that new framework. But then the most important thing is then how we're going to measure that we are progressing towards those 4 goals. So we're doing a thorough review of everything we're measuring at the moment. And we're actually being really critical of this and thinking, if we're measuring, because we measure a lot and the whole sector does, and we're starting to think, okay, if we're measuring things that aren't actually measuring our progress towards one of these 4 goals, maybe we don't need to measure it anymore. And we're developing over a period of time our measurement systems so that what's being recorded by our support workers and our managers is feeding up and being analysed by our quality safeguarding and practice team, what our quality safeguarding and practice partners are doing to measure the efficacy of their practice uplift initiatives is feeding up, so that ultimately the board and the subcommittees of the board and all of the senior management team are getting a regular report on progress towards those 4 quality goals. I guess one of the things that's kind of taken me a little while to grasp as we've moved on this journey is I've been like, wow, is it that simple? Is it that simple to really just think about putting a flag on the hill? Because we've got the practice standards, and we did have some discussion around, are the practice standards too complex? Do we need to simplify the practice standards and have, an Aruma set of standards that we're working towards? And ultimately that was just developing another set of standards, which none of us need in our lives. But to actually really think about why we're all here and what we're working towards, those 4 goals can be the string that ties everything we do together. It's those 4 goals that can help us to start to build that jigsaw piece into a puzzle that we can all see the picture of and that we're all working towards together. So that's the premise of what we're doing, and it'll be a 2 or 3 year project until we're feeling confident that every person we support is receiving consistently high quality services. But taking that somewhat simplistic approach to streamlining what we're working towards is how we're going to do it.
I love that. It creates connection points at all levels and domains of the business, etc. So that's really cool. Do you incorporate people with lived experience into all of these types of processes?
We do, yeah, absolutely. So Aruma's got a really fantastic human rights advisory team, which is made up of people who use our services. They do lots of things in their role, and they're employed by Aruma, of course. And they will attend working group meetings around practice uplift initiatives that we might be involved in. They participate in a quarterly human rights committee meeting with other family members and key people. That's actually an advisory committee which advises the board on matters associated with human rights, and they talk about all different things and have very robust discussions in those quarterly meetings, which is all fed up to the execs and the board. They support with recruitment. I'm recruiting a new quality safeguarding and practice partner next week, or interviewing for a new quality safeguarding and practice partner next week. So great to have a human rights advisor, one of the people we support, actually involved in those recruitments. Look, I think there's always opportunity to do more when it comes to involving the people we support. And Aruma, as part of our strategic plan, is really looking at ways in which we can involve and include people with disability and employ people with disability into decision-making roles and more decision-making roles across the organisation. So that's certainly part of our 3-year strategic plan. And again, it comes down to that reflection, and even as we were consultations were happening around the strategic plan, it really forced me to think, am I doing everything I can to involve the people who use our services in all of the work that the quality safeguarding and practice team does? And the answer is no. There's absolutely further opportunity to consider how we can bring people into the conversation more regularly and make sure that those opinions and that feedback is heard and validated and implemented. So
Correct. And even at the intake levels, just do a very quick parallel analogy to that. Think about including people with lived experience. Well, we've got our clients as well, right? So like I encourage my intake team to not just rely on, say, digitally signing a service agreement and flicking it off and all that stuff. Like, go round, sit down next to the person, create a relationship, actually go through it and explain each section so that they are consciously aware of what the hell they're signing. It's important. Tell them all the assumptions, the context, and give that opportunity for feedback. Don't just do it as a chore where you go, oh no, I've got to get through as you get the signature. Like, actually, truly, appreciate the feedback.
Absolutely, and that comes into our planning processes as well. I think one thing that's dropped off a little bit across the sector in recent years, it was quite the buzz for quite some time there, was the person-centered planning processes that Helen Sanderson developed and are still widely used and available. But I think we need to bring that back in a big way across the sector. Certainly at Aruma, we're looking at how we can use those tools to support some of our customer and participant planning processes. We've got these wonderful documents which outline the way in which support needs to be provided as directed by the person and their network, but it's the approach to that conversation, like you say, and it's the way in which that document is populated that makes all the difference. And doing that in a person-centered, collaborative way is just so important.
When I was 18 years old, my grandmother was getting to a state where she was about to go into a home and have my dad and his 3 sisters and all that stuff. And I remember over the dinner table them saying, oh God, stressed about, what the sister thinks or the brother thinks about what we should do with Nana. And I remember saying to my dad, just over dinner, I'm autistic, so I'm very direct. I said, Dad, have any of you asked Nana what she wants? And he just melted and almost started crying. I'm like, oh, fucking hell. Thank you, son, for cutting through all the noise. Ask the person, like bloody hell. Like we can all get, in our opinions about what we think should be done. We haven't included the person we're supporting, then that's not ethically bound.
Absolutely. It is that simple. I will say as well, though, one of the things we're looking at is, how we can improve on the way in which we support with decision making for the people who use our services as well. And again, that's built into our organisational strategy and will be a real focus over the next few years. We've started in terms of, we've been trialling various platforms and processes to really consider the way in which we are supporting people not only with their day-to-day choices, but also with those bigger life decisions as well. So how are we getting those circles of support in place for people, and how are we making sure that people aren't feeling isolated, and that they are supported with those big decisions in their lives, as well as that day-to-day life processes, and what to eat for dinner and what to wear, and what they want to do for the day. But there's just so much work that we can do in that space. So we'll really be looking at how we're providing that across the whole organisation in the coming months, and again thinking about what our opportunities for improvement are so that we can embed that over time.
Exactly. On the kind of like the riskier side of things, what can happen in the industry, we've got, unfortunately, the subject of potential abuse, neglect, violence, right, which people with disability statistically are more vulnerable to for horrendous reasons. But again, we need to be cognizant of that. When you were the national practice manager at the NDIS, there was the Zero Tolerance Initiative that had themes around that, I believe. From an Aruma point of view, how do you safeguard the rights of people you support so that they have a life where they can live free from abuse, free from neglect, free from violence?
Such an important topic, and we see, unfortunately, still matters arising and being reported in the media where things have gone wrong. And it's always in the front of my mind that I need to recognise that these things could be happening within Aruma services, and I need to be really thinking, and all organisations need to really be thinking about, not becoming complacent in this space.
Yep.
For me, look, the zero tolerance framework is excellent. It's evidence informed, and it provides really great guidance on what organisations should be doing. And it's a step above I know it's referenced in the NDIS practice standards, but it takes those practice standards to a next level when it comes to keeping people free from abuse, neglect, and violence, because it gives that real framework that organisations can apply. Over the last couple of months, we've actually implemented a working group, which is across a number of different teams, including, our people and human resources team, and our customer experience team, and our operational colleagues, and the quality safeguarding and practice team, and our policy team, our reporting and compliance team. We've all come together. There's a group of us who are really working through the Safeguarding for Boards resource that was developed as part of the Zero Tolerance Initiative. And within that resource, there's actually a checklist, and it's quite a comprehensive one that works through the 5 tiers of the Zero Tolerance framework and supports organisations to ask themselves questions about what they're doing across each of those 5 tiers of the framework. There's then a subsequent activity whereby boards can also undertake a checklist tailored for boards to really think about what the organisation's doing from a governance perspective. But it's been really interesting because there's lots of great things that we are doing at Aruma. We call ourselves a human rights-based organisation, and our values really align with that. And it's one thing to be focusing on education and we call it zero tolerance to mean training. So MEAN is an acronym for mistreatment, exploitation, abuse, and neglect, and it's very well known. It's an Aruma term, zero tolerance to mean, but it's very much been embedded across our organisation and aligned with the zero tolerance framework. So that's a big part of it, is getting that education right in the first instance, and making sure that people understand what we're talking about when we're talking about abuse, neglect, and violence. But then it's looking at those preventative measures. So one of the biggest drivers of that, I think, is manager presence within services. We've restructured our operational services so that in the past, managers were managing upwards of 4, 5, or 6 services each, which was making it really hard for them to be present and providing that ongoing practice leadership to their support teams within services. So now managers don't manage any more than 2 services across our home and living portfolio. And that's enabled greater manager presence, better support and development conversations, better opportunities for observation and coaching from managers. And also, we've developed a practice leadership framework, and it's aligned with La Trobe's practice leadership framework, but we've also included in there as a responsibility for the manager of each service that one of the components of practice leadership for them is to be fostering a positive culture within the services that they manage. And it's one thing to talk about an organisational culture. It's another thing to recognise that all of those different group homes and supported employment businesses and, one-on-one support within people's individual homes and children's services, they're all little microcosms of cultures. And if we don't have strong practice leadership actually really fostering and kindling those positive cultures within our services, that's where I see the real risk. And we're really trying to address that and have developed tools to get people to really reflect on what the culture of their service is, and get that support worker buy-in around, well, what culture do we want to have here, and how can we all work together to create that? So that's been a really powerful initiative, and is ongoing to really think about that culture at a micro level. Of course, we've got to understand risk, and we've got to always be thinking about where there is greater risk within any of our services. Services that are very remote have a higher risk. Services where people are being supported, one-on-one, and there's not a lot of staff changeover. That
the vulnerable
piece
person,
that we've,
aspect,
absolutely.
which is very. I'm glad to see it. Like, some people may go like, "Oh God, that's so pedantic. It's so much paperwork." But no, it's after, unfortunately, I think that Adelaide incident, it's very necessary.
Absolutely.
Only one worker, only one provider, kind of communicate themselves independently. All of that stuff, crucial. You can't just treat it like a register. You can't go, oh, we'll put them on the vulnerable person register. They actually really got to bring it to life, as you say, by having manager presence at least.
Yes. How can we address that risk? Absolutely. I could go on. It's hard to articulate all the things that we're doing with respect to safeguarding the people we support. One of the things that we found really helpful and useful is multidisciplinary support team meetings. So similar to circles of support, but more formal in terms of bringing people together for that multidisciplinary approach to really work and meet regularly. That's a safeguarding mechanism even in and of itself. You know, having multiple people involved in the person's life gives me assurance that I'm not relying on, you know, one or two people advocating for that person's best needs, that we've actually got a team of people working around that person for their best outcomes. So that's been something we've been really focusing on embedding. And I guess just ensuring staff understand their reporting obligations. You know, sometimes staff are not always sure, you know, what it is that they need to report and whether they should be reporting, you know, gut feelings to their managers. So we, as a quality safeguarding and practice team, facilitate lots of discussion-based workshops with support teams and their managers to really get people to actually reflect on what it is that they should be reporting and when and why, and that they don't have to wait until they've actually seen something happen, that they can raise when they're feeling uncomfortable that something might be occurring, and raise that with their manager and encourage that positive speaking up culture across the whole organization.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, love it. That's so important. I think there's a segue and a link here to the NDIS review and the recommendation that all providers become registered. So to me, it's kind of, you know, if you compare it to other industries, to me it's shocking that you know, you can be an unregistered provider, you know, right now, and just, you know, like, I mean, for example, for transparency, I'm an unregistered provider on the Central Coast, but I've passed my quality audit. I'm going to have to wait 12 to 18 months for the agency to give me my bloody registration because they've got a backlog. But nevertheless, I think that I personally do wholeheartedly agree with the recommendation to have everyone registered. I like the idea of tiered approaches, etc. I also do like the idea that if if you've got X number of complaints, or you've got whatever negative outcomes where there's findings against you as a provider, that the purse strings need to be impacted. You should not be paid for your services anymore. I think we need to raise that standard, because if there's one surefire way to get people's attention, it's that if you don't do the job right and follow the practice standards, then you ain't getting paid. And I think in a way that's good, because let me give an analogy. When I recruit in my business, I have set up a pre-employment check. And what I do is I say, thanks so much for your interest. I need to see all of the mandatory documents, your CPR, first aid, working with children check, police check, or if it's applicable, all of that. And I need you to upload it here. So we're going to cite that before we even invite you to interview. That's my personal philosophical approach. Some people go, oh God, no one's going to do that. They won't respond. They won't come to interview. They think it's too much. My philosophy there is that I only want the type of people that go, yeah, no problem, I've got all of that, here you go. Because what that tells me is that they are ethically and competently the right person, and culturally they're communicative, they get back to you, and they're a good fit. So like them filling in that pre-employment check form, even just being responsive to my email, sending me a text back to say, thanks so much, I've sent you the details. That's exactly who I want in my culture, because I know that I can rely on them from an integrity point of view. And I know that they're going to follow through and get the renewals that they need to when CPR comes up, for example. So can you see, what do you think of that analogy? I feel the reason I make it, Dave, is that I think, you know, saying to all providers, you've got to be registered, at least at this level. If it gets rid of the ones that aren't willing to do it, then I think it's the cultural clean out that we need within the industry to say, I'm sorry, if you're not willing to philosophically buy into being in this for the right reasons, then you're in the wrong industry. So I think you have to set the bar high. I'm sorry for my rant, but what do you think?
No, I'm on board. I do agree with you, and I absolutely agree that we need to, you know, we really need to look at the registration process, because it's that balance, isn't it? Yes, we want people to have choice and control over the providers in which they engage, but we also want to have that assurance and that ability to understand who's providing those services and that they're meeting a certain standard. We've got to look at the reasons why people aren't registering, though. That's a huge administrative burden currently. It's a costly process, and people aren't seeing the benefits.
Yes.
Because people with disability are choosing an unregistered provider as quickly as they'll choose a registered provider. So unless we're going to mandate this and move to the tiered approach, as you say, we're not going to see change. And I agree, a tiered approach is the way to go. Certainly, where more risky and more complex supports are being provided, there needs to be rigorous oversight, and there needs to be a registration process. And with those expectations and administrative burden around registration and costs of registration then lowering, as we're seeing less risky supports, makes complete sense to me as well. But yeah, something does need to change. I mean, we've got 150,000 odd providers out there with minimal oversight at the moment. That's a lot of people who are receiving services. And yeah, to bring more under that umbrella of the NDIS Commission and have better processes to ensure that practice standards are being adhered to is a good step in the right direction.
Totally agree. I mean, again, at the grassroots levels here on the Central Coast, the number of times I'm hearing either from staff that I bring on board, support coordinators, sometimes participants, they go, "Oh God, you're amazing. You actually asked me, you check the things that I know you're meant to check." Oh, my old employer, they still owe me my super. Like, you know, it literally disgusts me. To be candid, that's the case. So I think I agree with your nuance that there needs to be a balance, and I think the tiered thing. As a person that came into the industry about 5 or 6 years ago now, one thing I always thought of was that if we've got these standards that are meant to unify us, one thing that kind of illogically blows my mind a little bit is that we've all got 100 different policies and procedures. And yes, we can go to the consultancies and get a policy pack and blah, blah, blah. But like the thing that's still icky for me is, why is it that even like maybe for 50% of maybe policies and procedures, why aren't we all singing from the same hymn sheet for at least a subset? And I mean, the reason I say that is because when you've got all of this interpretability and audit, and yes, of course, you want to make it the Aruma way or the whatever way, you know, I get that. So I'm not saying every single policy, but my idea is like, is there not a way to help reduce administrative burden by just saying, like, here's like the standard pack that actually comes from the commission that we all need to follow, and that's it. Like, this is how you do mealtime management or whatever, you know, things like that. What do you think? Again, it's just ideas. I'm spitballing here, but I feel like we need to get a bit more unified, as well as making it easier to register. Yeah, raise the standards.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I love the suggestion and to put thought to that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a lot of interpretability in the practice standards and the legislation. You know, I think about, you know, HIDPA, for example, high intensity daily personal activities, and the practice standards and high intensity skills descriptors associated with HIDPA. I'm sure Aruma's not alone here in terms of, you know, we've been racking our brains on the best approach to interpreting those standards and having procedures which are supporting us as an organisation to meet those standards, whilst also not putting, you know, the allied health professionals we're working with offside with all of these requests that we're making of them to ensure we're meeting these standards and having the appropriate processes in place so that people are receiving safe supports and that staff are receiving their training and that they're reserved appropriately, and et cetera, et cetera. But the more we've consulted with other service providers, which we're now doing more and more, to really get a sense of, like, how are you doing that? Because this is really tricky to actually find the best approach to this and to interpret these standards and put them into procedure in a way that's actually going to work logistically and practically. So I'm all for greater consistency and specification on what the Commission is asking of us, and to have that in, you know, procedural excerpts, for example. I do think there's benefit in organisations being able to put their own flavour to the way in which they operate.
And I agree with that too. Very much so.
And of course, we all need to.
It's kind of like it's like an oxymoron in a way. It's a paradox. You know, we need to have some sets of standard ones, but also, you know, a bit of flavour too.
Absolutely. I also don't envy that. Like, if that team was to be established in the NDIS Commission, I don't envy that team, and I don't envy the person who would need to manage maintaining the currency of those policies and procedures, noting the state-based differences across the various regions that we operate, where there is opportunity to have that consistent procedural excerpt. Absolutely, I think it'd be fantastic, but you'd really want to make sure that is remaining current, because it also somewhat takes the onus off providers as well to be keeping up to date with ever-changing landscapes of legislation and changing practice standards, which would be great from a provider perspective, but it might be hard to execute in a centralized way and maintain that currency unless it was very well orchestrated.
I'll positively challenge that, and I'll say this idea. If you've got all these ISO accredited auditors and they're all coming in, saying, but don't you know about the latest thing here, which is great. It's the educational process. I get that. Well, actually, if you've got all these ISO accredited auditors coming down from the heavens of the practice standards, then surely actually we get those 20 auditors as companies together to collaborate and do some common policy and procedure packs, at least for that subset. Do you see what I mean? Because then we could just go, here you go, practice announcement
fantastic
update.
Idea.
Not just that, here you go, everyone. It's free because you've registered.
Absolutely. We could have excerpts around things like incident management practices. We could have excerpts around things like medication procedures, end-of-life procedures, HIPAA procedures. If we could take some of the interpretation out of some of those really complex spaces. And let's be honest, a lot of this stuff isn't in the practice standards. We're needing to take information for our procedures from places much broader than the practice standards, and looking at peak bodies in different areas of practice and really thinking about the research. And there's also differences of opinion around the best approach to operating and to doing certain things. So having that ability to tweak and add your flavor where there might be contradictory evidence on best practice would be important also.
Here's one final idea to run by. I want to see what you think of this. Before disability, I used to work in the vet sector. So I feel like the NDIS still has an opportunity to learn from vocational accreditation. So in the vet sector, there's a concept of recognition of prior learning, RPL. And so what that means is you've either got industry experience or you did a unit, and you can go along to the training organization and go, look, I've already got this bit of my certificate 4 or my diploma or whatever. So I feel like that there's an opportunity to translate that stuff. And I'm not just talking about whether you got a Cert 3 or a Cert 4. I feel like there's an opportunity to centralize a learning management system that has recognition of prior learning nationally, right? Because it's all very well and good that we can go to do the commission's safe and enjoyable means course or the new worker orientation course. That's great. And you can download your PDF. But if you're going to have workers that go from provider to provider to provider, surely we should have some RPL where we can go, here are your qualification badges that show to me, and it's all linked to audit, so we can go, you actually do have training in dysphagia. You actually do have training in restrictive practice because here's your badge, here's your certificate. Like, what do you think of that concept?
Absolutely love that idea. And I feel like we've been talking about that for a little while in terms of a skills passport across the sector.
Yes.
Again, it's probably the execution of it that's the challenge, and it would need to be something that was funded and really well thought through. But an approach like that would also, I think, assist with workforce retention as well. We're still, as a sector, really struggling to attract and retain really good, high quality support workers and managers, and I know Aruma is not the only organisation who grapples with that, because it's ever changing as well. So to find ways to actually retain workers, and I think a skills passport would go a long way to achieving that, because it would help people to develop in the sector as opposed to develop in an organisation. And movement between organisations will happen, but if we can find a way to maintain the number of people working in the sector as a whole and grow on that, but also make it much easier for service providers with respect to adhering to standards of legislation with respect to training. I'm all for that suggestion, Chris. Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. There's ways, right? And I hope that even just conversations like this help to influence it. I know that Aruma is part of Alliance 20, for example. You've got that, that kind of, should we say, lobbying aspect of things that's possible to speak to the agencies. So I thoroughly appreciate everything that Alliance 20 is doing and people like yourselves are doing. So it's probably a good note to wrap things up on. Dave, I've thoroughly appreciated this conversation. It always, opens up my heart, so to speak, and reminds me of philosophically why we're doing these things, but also intellectually gives me inspiration for myself and for other providers that I work with to go, let's actually put some of these ideas in place. So thank you for sharing the philosophy and also the intellect of what you're actually doing too.
Absolute pleasure, Chris. Thanks for asking me to come along. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. All right. Well, Dave Relf from Aruma, it's been an absolute pleasure. My name's Chris Hall. This is the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. And if you're interested in having a look at any other webinars or podcasts, etc., just go to peakprovider.com.au. Dave, thanks again, mate, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Once again, for a final reminder, this podcast was brought to you by Izango Care Partners in partnership with Peak Provider. Highly recommend checking out a demo. Click the show notes below and book yourself in to have a look at what the system can do.